That was a look at East New York in its heyday, folks like Jimmy SMITS and Tony Danza, but who knew that George Gershwin was an East New York native? And a little bit closer to my house, Thelma from Good Times.
That's right.
She's from Brownsville, don't forget Bernadette. And as we saw in this video, that was a once vibrant section of the borough, but after the arrival of huge housing projects in the 50s and 60s, East New York gradually became infamous for its crime and poverty. Now, what happened, and why after all these years does East New York still have some serious problems?
And why does it take a tragedy like the recent stabbings to draw attention to this neighborhood in need? Today, we're delighted to welcome back Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of the 8th Democratic District, which includes East New York. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have the Reverend David K. Brawley, lead pastor at St. Paul's Community Baptist Church in East New York, and a longtime community activist. Thank you so much for having me. And Andre T. Mitchell, chair of Community Board 5 in East New York and executive director of the community organization Man Up, Inc. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you guys. And just to start out from the offset of saying, there's headlines, there's stuff that happened in East New York recently, but this is not one of those conversations about what's so bad or why are these people like bad or something, or what's the community, why is it so sick? We're talking about solutions and moving things forward, and that's why we invited you guys who are actively engaged in finding solutions and moving the community forward. But someone was stabbed, someone tragically died by a person who was clearly sick. It's not just a crime problem, it was a singular event that happened with an individual who needs some help.
No question. I think just for matters of corrections, there were several stabbings. Unfortunately, there was an 18-year-old as well, Tania Copeland, who was also stabbed that prior Friday. And so to date, we have not gotten a full update from NYPD on whether or not these stabbings were correlated. So until we get that, we're still treating it as if there is only 50% of the mystery solved. And so we, as far as the community level, we're still on high alert.
And what has been the community's reaction to these events?
The community reacted, I think, like any other normal community would. They pulled together. It just was a tragedy that no one expected to take place. It had a lot of impact as it relates to our young people, most importantly, so it's very serious and very sensitive. And we were really caught off guard, honestly. As a community, we were caught off guard, but I think that out of the tragedy, some positives came together, because now as a community, we've all pulled together.
Yeah, I would say that we saw some unusual things happen and occur. Community groups coming together like never before. I thought the NYPD did an exceptional job of working with the community hand in hand. Obviously, we didn't want to be painted as a depraved community. Tragedy hits every community, and this was our time, but the reaction and the response of the community, I thought, was exceptional. Some of our children around the church made comments to me about being afraid to go back in elevators. So, I mean, it's obviously something that we're grappling with. There's an emotional issue, there's the psychological damage that's been inflicted by this, but certainly this community's done exceptionally well of working through this issue.
Reverend Brawley spoke a moment ago about the police response, and we're like happy that the community and the police found some common ground and this thing was moved upon very quickly, but you were there calling for that police action and even further action in the future.
Well, you know, we wanted to make sure that in terms of the traumatic nature of the event and the fact that you had a psychopath, at least one, possibly multiple individuals who would engage in this type of horrific activity on the loose, that the law enforcement response was appropriately significant and robust at all levels, as it would be in other communities hit by similar tragedies, as we've seen all across the country. We received that appropriate level of response connected to this traumatic event. Now it's our job to make sure that that level of law enforcement engagement continues, and that the type of relationship that Pastor Brawley referenced, where there was significant cooperation, particularly amongst the Community Affairs Division of the Police Department and the 75th Precinct, along with the community, continues in a way that helps us improve the quality of life for everyone in East New York. It's an incredibly close-knit, hard-working community filled with individuals who care about making East New York the best that it can be. It has been ignored for a long period of time by multiple levels of government. We are coming out of a drought imposed on East New York by 20 years of Giuliani and Bloomberg, where community institutions such as St. Paul's Community Baptist Church, Man Up, and others has really filled a void that was necessary and done a tremendous job in making East New York what it is today. Dramatic decline in crime, wonderful community 20 years out from 1993, as you pointed out. Still a lot of work to be done, and now we've got to move forward with that next level of engagement.
So you guys have stood in the gap all this time, and we know that the killing of children is not a community value. What are the values in this community?
Hardworking folk. East New York is where we raise our children.
Yeah.
East New York has a vibrant senior population that's emerging. It's where we worship. It's where we work. It's where we live. It's where we educate our children. It's a tight-knit community. And back in the 80s, it was depicted as the killing fields, the murder capital of the state of New York. It is not that any longer. It is a great and emerging community that certainly can use some more resources.
Right. And Andre, tell us a little bit about your organization, Man Up.
Well, our organization is 10 years old now, and we're really happy about that accomplishment, considering, you know, the hardships that nonprofits face in their inception. But interestingly enough, we began 10 years ago after the tragic death of 8-year-old Deshaun Hill. He was gunned down, unfortunately, in the middle of some drug beef. And we began to, at that time, put together a community volunteer-led group of men and women. And that grew into a bona fide, you know, CBO to date. It's 10 years young and actually have about 27 employees today. We provide all types of levels of service to the community, everything from after school and summer day camp programs to athletic programs, job development. We have a job development center where we help people that are underemployed and unemployed, formerly incarcerated, get ready for work. And then we have our new department, which is our anti-violence department. We've been doing some remarkable work for the past 5 years in anti-violence. And we are able to attack violence at its core. And prior to, as mentioned, you know, this incident, our neighborhood was experiencing a very peaceful period. The crime in East New York, interestingly enough, right now, there seems to be some spikes where we're seeing, but prior to that, there was a lot of decline, which says that this was a neighborhood that was on a comeback and it was working together to kind of make it a peaceful neighborhood.
Well, I was talking about working together. There's like a lot of layers that do have to come together, but one that we talked specifically about is the lack of representation. Like City Council member Inez Barron was the representative in the state legislature, and now there's a vacuum there. If you call up the office, there's a message that says, hey, call the police or something if you have a problem. There's no representation there. So how does this community begin to move forward? Like, well, intentions are one thing, but we need state money to fund programs like yours and look for other solutions from housing to anti-violence. So how is that power vacuum in elected office affecting the community?
Well, certainly a challenge that exists right now if you look at both East New York and the neighboring community of Brownsville, where you have both members of the state assembly, one of whom left the office, the other whom was convicted and forced to vacate office, but both of them are open right now. You've got an open state Senate seat that goes into Brownsville, doesn't touch East New York, and then you've got some issues related to the incumbent state senator in East New York. If you combine that all, we're certainly in a period of transition and uncertainty, but I'm confident that we're on our way out of it. The community's voices will ultimately have to be heard in terms of who the residents of East New York and Brownsville and the neighboring community make a decision as to who is best fit to represent them. But then the obligation amongst all of us who are privileged to serve will be to come together. And you know, in the past in Brooklyn, far too often political conflicts that take place during the campaign spill over into the period of governance, but that hurts the people that we are charged to represent.
Right.
And so we've got to, and I take particular responsibility now that I'm at the federal level of government and trying to pull folks together to make sure that whoever's in office, our mission is to serve the public, to help out those who are doing the work such as Pastor Brawley, such as AT, such as many others who are out in the community, and to make sure that we are bringing the federal government, the city government, and the state government to life in East New York in a meaningful way, in the same way that other communities have experienced in the past.
Pastor Brawley, what are you looking for in an elected?
Okay, let me just reframe and say that we're not letting grass grow under our feet while we're waiting for political figures to come into office. What we've been doing is a lot of ground game, organizing our people, because one of my concerns would be a lethargic, unorganized, and uninformed constituency. Whoever gets into office needs to hear the organized voice and the will of the people. One of the things that we did this past year is we got into public housing, and we organized at the grassroots level. And we did it by something really revolutionary. We talked to people, and we heard their concerns. And we had some wonderful house meetings and eventually community level meetings, and we forced the hands of those who had power to get over 400 repairs done within the time period of about 30 days.
What about cameras? Is that part of the conversation?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. What's the relationship now with NYCHA? I mean,
well,
after these events?
we're still relating. As a matter of fact, we've got some upcoming meetings, and we're going to continue to relate when it comes down to cameras. That's something that's already been in the pipeline anyway, but we're going to make sure that we push to make it happen and hold some folk accountable.
So one of the sort of other NYCHA pieces, one was the cameras and the layered security that they talk a lot about. The other is we're in this sort of what they've been calling the post-stop and frisk era of community policing. And I wanted to ask you guys, doing that groundwork, where's the community on that? Because there's certainly some level of community policing that should happen, but not harassing of young men.
Very good question. As you can imagine, this sort of practice over the years has created a great divide between the community and the police. And so with the activism, with coming together, we've been able to reform it to a degree where we would hope to see it ultimately abolished altogether. But in our backyard, unfortunately, in the 75th precinct, we've experienced far too many stop, questions, and frisks. And so now that we've had some working relationship where it's based out of the of trust and trying to at least begin to get to know one another better, we are beginning to see a decline in that. Okay, and now it has a lot more to do with relationship building. But make no mistakes about it. There's still a divide. There is still some issues there. There's still a gap between the police and the community, and we're working to hopefully be able to mend that fence. But right now, our backyard is one that is actually, as we mentioned, it's on a come up, and it's on a climb. It's on not a decline, but it's climbing out of the ashes, and so we would like to hopefully continue in that trend. But community policing, if I may, I'm sorry to add, that is a model that, a lot of times when people see any groups of community folks gathered in as a group and walking through, at first when we began to do this type of work as an organization, we were victimized by the public. People, they associated us to the police. It was mischaracterized by the public because they just was not used to seeing community members coming together and making it safe for people to just to walk and to play. But now that we've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, we have a great idea of what the community has a better idea of what a community policing model looks like. And it's not that we are trying to be a secondary police force, because we're not equipped with the equipment or the technology that the police department, but we are, as community members, have a responsibility to be the first responders, to be the people who are on the scene first and foremost, and have an obligation. If we can interrupt certain incidences, we should take advantage of that.
Well, I wanted to comment. First of all, stop, question, and frisk. The problem with it was there was very little questioning going on. It was stopping and frisking and harassing, and that created some great tension. But also, if we want to increase reconnaissance and surveillance, keep grandma in the community.
Yes.
I mean, I'm serious about this. Members of my congregation have reported, and they can actually come to their church and say to their church, listen, I want to make sure that you know what's going on this corner, what's going on here. We get the information to the 7-5, to the police department, and then action can be taken. So I think what we're going to have to do is look at NYCHA lots, available property, and build some senior housing. Get grandma into an appropriate apartment with the services that she needs. Keep her in the community because she's the eyes and the ears. She needs to stay connected to the services she's been receiving, and that will stabilize the community in a greater way.
Definitely.
So moving the conversation forward, that's an important point because Charles Barron was here and he was talking about how East New York in a lot of ways is the last frontier of New York in terms of available tracts of land. Everybody's going to want to get there eventually once they wake up to Walmart's not the only. Yeah, I mean, like Walmart's not the only one who wants to be there. So gentrification, you've always been a champion for self-determination in communities and not having cultural gentrification as well. Are people in East New York worried about that sort of, okay, it's coming, it's only going to be a matter of time?
Well, the gentrification that we've seen take place, particularly over the last 10 years in central Brooklyn, Prospect Heights, Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, now into Bedford-Stuyvesant, has been intense. And essentially, those neighborhoods in large measure are out of reach for working families, for middle-class folks, for senior citizens, for young people who are starting out. The African-American community that traditionally had been very strong in its presence in Fort Greene, in Clinton Hill, certainly in Bedford-Stuyvesant, is being pushed out. Some are being forced to move down south. Some are being forced to move to the Poconos or other parts of Pennsylvania. And some are looking to other parts of New York City. Now, there are very few parts of New York City that remain affordable. And also there are high areas of vacant land or city-owned land. East New York is one of them. I think it's our job to make sure, and I've been quite clear with the de Blasio administration about this, and they are more sensitive to the notion of the gentrification impact and its adverse effects on communities of color and on individuals, is that we're not interested in luxury housing that is out of reach to the people who live in East New York. We want affordable housing broadly defined at all levels. Now, there traditionally has been a robust, moderate income, working class group of people who've lived in East New York. Homeowners, both in terms of the Nehemiah homes that have been built, as well as traditional homeowners who purchased property as the community began to change in the 60s and into the 70s, who are still there. These are city workers, and we want to make sure that folks can continue to reside in the community, and we don't see the type of out-of-control inflationary price escalation that ultimately turns a community over. We want change, we want economic development, but it cannot come at the expense of the current East New York residents.
Absolutely. If I can add to the Congressman's comments.
This is going to be our last point, unfortunately. We're running out of time.
But I think he hit it right on the head as it relates to us out in East New York. We've been through some very rough days. We've been through the bad and the ugly days. And now that we do see a good day coming forward, a renaissance, if you will, we do would like that, as the Reverend mentioned, those that have been there for the history should also enjoy some of the better days. And so, yes, we do foresee some of that wave trying to come its way, but this is where, again, we work together to try to make sure that if it's any economic development taking place, it's responsible, and that the people who have been there the longest enjoy some of these opportunities that are currently being made available. And so we're working together on that.
Well, that's going to be the last word, the very last word.
Thank you for this format, because one of the concerns that we have is that oftentimes developers maximize off the fact that things are going down so they can buy low and sell high. So it's going a whole lot better than people think. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming here. We want to always continue this dialogue. We invite all of you to come back and do that. We're here in our community and we're talking to our community. It's not that snippets. Like we get have a conversation.
Full story. Yes.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for furthering the dialogue. We appreciate it.
Likewise.